Hey everybody, DJ here. Welcome back. This is going to be part two of the Fireball Simulations in Blender series. If you haven't done part one, go back and watch that so you know what's going on. But basically, we're going to be doing some really high resolution stuff so that your fire and smoke simulation will stop looking not so great. And in this one, basically, you're going to end up with something really awesome. We're not doing materials, we're just doing the simulation in this one. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so here we are inside of Blender, and we are going to go ahead and start on our high res cache of our smoke simulation. Now, what I'm going to do, because I did some testing on the side on what I really liked, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here to the subdivisions, and I'm just going to increase this a bit. You don't have to. I'm going to increase this a bit, just two more here. I'm just going to turn it up on render, even though it's not going to be rendered. It's fine. Then what we're going to do here is I am going to also change the subsampling because it is going kind of fast and I do want a little bit more smoke and fire to come out. So I'm going to increase the subsampling a little bit, maybe two. You can try three, but remember that everything that you do here is going to increase the amount of space that's being used on your computer for RAM and stuff like that, which I'm going to go into in a little bit. So this one's going to be really focused heavily on trying to get a very high quality, decent render out of our smoke here. A lot of people say you can't get anything decent out of the Manta Flow system, which is not true. As you saw from the intro to this video, you can get some really amazing results and it can look really, really good. So we have that increase there, and let's go to our domain here. And we're going to take a look at some of our settings. So you can see here that it's set to 128. Make sure that you have the adaptive domain on. And what we're going to do, let's go ahead and play this back. And it looks like I actually have this set in a different cache. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this caching to this other one that I have here, Smoke Cache 2, because I was doing some testing and it kind of messed up this cache. But here we go. So you can see here, there's my fireball, cool simulation, and it's fairly low resolution. And one thing that you really need to pay attention to when it comes to this is the what's called voxel size. And volumes and a lot of like just objects. Let's actually turn off this wall right here while we're playing with this. Volumes are basically calculated using a metric called voxels, which is like this little cube right here. So if I hit 1 and we take a look, you can see that this is the size of our voxel shape. Okay, and if I hit 3, you can see that's three-dimensional. So the volume is basically in this sort of like squared grid pattern. Okay, and the smaller the voxel, the more high resolution it is. And how you change the voxel size is by the resolution divisions up here. So it basically divides your box that you're creating your smoke simulation in by whatever that is. And that may sound cool to you. You may be like, okay, great. Let's increase this to like 300. Well, the problem with that is it does take a lot of room on your computer. So you need to keep that in mind when you're running these simulations. You need to check to see how big your file is and if you have enough gigs of space or sometimes terabytes to hold that smoke simulation. The other thing is that it will be very RAM hungry. So what I mean is the RAM, or the random access memory on your computer, it can get filled up by these things. And if you keep a base subdivision of, let's say, 412, it can make your computer really chug. And when you're trying to do other things, like do some shading or trying to make a spark, sort of like particle simulation, which is what we're going to do for this tutorial, or at least in this series, it will make it very, very slow and you're going to have a really hard time. And for those of you with what they call potato PCs, this could be a problem. So you might want to just keep the resolution divisions down for a little bit, and I'm going to show you how you can kind of, um, you know, gauge that. So if we take a look here at the other settings here, what you could do, if we go down here in gas, you can see there's dissolve right here, and if I click that on, you can see that it removed everything. And what this does is it basically dissolves the smoke that happens or that's created from your fire simulation. So if you don't want a whole lot of smoke, then you can turn on this dissolve, and the lower the number, the faster it dissolves, the higher the number. So if we change that to a 30, for example, you can see that it will linger. So we have some smoke that's still there, okay? And if you take off this slow right here, it will just make it even faster as far as the dissolving of this smoke. So if we, change this to like, let's say 150, you should be able to see some of the smoke sort of, stay in there, and it's not a slow dissolve anymore. It's more of a fast dissolve, which may be what you're looking for this particular tutorial. And if you do have a lower powered computer, I do recommend that you do something like this because it does help save you on your render speed and overall RAM usage. But because I want to make some really cool smoke effects like I showed in the beginning of this tutorial, I'm going to actually keep this off because I really like the neat smoke effects that you can do. But again, that's totally up to you. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something that I don't see a lot of people do, and I'm going to show you how to basically monitor your equipment. So you can see here, I have this program here, OCCT version 5.5.5. There's a newer version, but I just haven't upgraded yet, but it's fine, it still works. It doesn't use my GPU monitoring as well as it could because other monitoring software does it better for the 3090 that I have. But you can see here, there's RAM here and there's CPU usage. And I do cover some of this in a video on how to optimize your GPU and CPU stuff. So you can check out those videos. I'll put a link down in the video description. But if you take a look here, you can see that I'm already using 7.7, or I mean, if you take a look at this, this is basically your RAM, okay? And a lot of people have like 8 gigs of RAM, and we're at almost 8 right now. So smoke simulations, fire simulations, this is one of those things that if you're going to increase anything on your computer for cheap, RAM is where you want to go. People will argue with me, and you're wrong. You want RAM, okay? GPU, yes. GPU is the next thing that you really want, and your CPU as well. GPU is probably more important now than CPU, but RAM, you can't even make stuff unless you have a very high capacity RAM system sometimes. Now, I'm going to be running this simulation to try and keep it below 16 because I think a lot of people have about 16, but ideally, you want to have 32 gigs of RAM in your computer to start to do some of these more high end smoke simulations and fire simulations. But I'm going to do my best to help you out here, and I'll tell you how you can keep your RAM usage down. And I'm going to try and monitor as best I can, but I'm going to put it right back up here in the corner. And we're going to just monitor this. And I do recommend that you get something like this to monitor your computer so that you know what you're doing, what you can get away with, and what you can't, and how much space you actually have on your computer. So if you run the simulation, you can kind of monitor to like, see where you're at. We are only at, let's see here, 128 subdivisions, and we're going to end up kicking this up to 256. So, just keep that in mind if you do have a lower end computer, not lower end, but a, not as high end computer as far as mine, which, most of you should not have. Just keep that in mind. You might need to just stay with 128 and do a couple other tricks to make this look really nice, and we'll talk about that later. But it is good practice to get used to this kind of stuff because, learning how to do this is important, and you can upgrade your computer later once you, develop some skills. So let's now go over and we are going to change how this is caching. So if you go down to the right here and we go into the cache settings, we're going to change this from replay to modular. And what you'll also want to do is click this little button right here that says is resumable. Okay. So when you click that, it's going to allow us to now bake our data. And if I click bake here, actually, let's double check something. Okay, adaptive domain. Yeah. So you can actually also add resolution here. So if we take a look at this and we increase this, you can actually increase some of the resolution for the adaptive domain. But we're just going to leave this alone. We're not really going to use this right now. Okay. So we're just going to use this base stuff here because we can get really good results from just this. If you want to experiment, please, by all means, experiment with the adaptive domain, adding resolution here. It does work pretty well. So let's go up here. We're going to change this to 256. And we are going to bake this data. And as we click bake, you can see that the timeline is running at the bottom. And if I, for any reason, I just want to stop it to see how things are going, I can hit escape. And we can see how our simulation is coming together. And the really awesome thing is over here, you can see there's a button that says free or resume. So if it doesn't look great, you can free it. And if it looks really good, you can resume it and you don't have to worry about anything. And this also, as far as I understand, this also works when you shut down your computer for the night. So let's say you're baking something out because it's a really long simulation, like 1200 frames or something, and you only get done with like 200 frames. You can save your session, close down your computer, and then reopen it back up, and you can start right back where you were. So it's a really, really awesome way of doing this. The old way, basically, you clicked start and you'd have to let it finish, or if you hit escape, you can take a look at it, but you'd have to restart the bake all the way over again. So the fact that you can start it up from where you left off is so awesome. So let's just let this finish up baking out, and we're going to take a look at how this is shaping up. We are finished here, and you can see that it is staying right underneath 8 gigs of RAM, which is awesome. So let's go ahead and minimize that down. And hopefully you guys don't need to see the tree up here on the top right. Let's take a look here. When we press play, if we take a look at it, you can see, and you can notice that the computer's kind of chugging now, or at least a little bit. And we can take a look and see how the detail is looking. And if we take a really close look, you can see there's these weird lines, and it sort of looks blocky. And that's because that voxel shape down there. This is what it looks like when you have a larger voxel shape. If you increase this to like 312, yes, you will get a better looking main run for this smoke simulation, and you'll get a lot more smoke, you'll tend to get more fire, you'll tend to get a little bit of a different result. That's just how it works. But you're also going to increase the amount of RAM that's being used and the amount of space being used on your computer. So sometimes it's better to keep it low, like this 256 here is actually a pretty low number, um, and then use a different method to increase your detail level of your smoke simulation. So if we let's see what it looks like when we add the subdivisions. So if we free the data, go down here to adaptive domain, and let's just increase the resolution by 2 here, okay? And we're going to click bake, and let's see what happens when that's done. You'll notice that it does take longer. And I will increase the size of OCCT so you can see what it looks like when the RAM is shown here after it finishes baking. Okay, so now that it's finished and we take a look at this, you can still see that it's still voxely. And if you take a look at OCCT there, you can see that it's, still at around 8. There are some frames that go above 8. So if you do only have an 8 gig system, you're going to have a little bit of trouble with this in general. I'm just letting you know off the bat here. So I'm going to minimize that, and let's just take a look here. So if we zoom in, we can see that the voxel information is still there, or it still looks very voxely. Okay, we can see kind of the edges of this thing. And depending on what you're trying to do, this might be okay. But really, we want to do some really high resolution stuff. So let's go over here to the shader editor. And if we look here, we already have a smoke domain material. And if you don't have this, this is what we created with the quick smoke search. And we're going to go here and we're going to make sure that this is changed to cycles. I'm going to change this to GPU. And we're going to save this as 2A. All right. And let's take a look at this rendered view. Okay, there we go. And if we take a look here and we'll just kind of zoom around, you can see that we have our smoke here. I'm going to just take a look here at the principled volume. And what you'll want to do is hit Shift A, search for volume, and you'll get volume info, okay? And you'll take the flame and put that into the black body intensity, okay? And then we're going to have some sort of fireball. Now, we're not going to be doing materials in this. This is not going to be the final, okay? The images that I showed look way more awesome, and it's because there's a lot of very complex stuff. Well, it's not very complex, but there's some things that we need to do to make this good, and we're going to cover that in a later tutorial. But if we take a look here just at what it looks like at the moment, it's very obvious where the voxel information is. You can actually see, let's actually take the background here, and we're going to make this black. You can actually see some of the lines, and I'm going to add, if I go to the 3D viewport here, I'm going to Shift A, add a light. It's going to be a point light. I'm going to grab it and put it behind the smoke, like over here. Okay. And we're going to take the power of this, and let's just make it 5,000 is a little bit tough. Let's make it 2,500. 2,500. Okay. And you can see there that we have some smoke. And if we zoom in, it doesn't look super great. It just, it kind of looks like whatever. And let's actually take the fireball and we can turn that off now. And that's what it looks like. Now we can take this and we can increase the temperature if we want to like 1500, which makes that super, super bright. But that doesn't really do anything. And if we take the density here and we turn this to, let's say, 50, we can make it super, super dense. Okay, so we can really see what's happening with our volume. And if I go to the 3D viewport and I hit Shift D on this and I just move this to the other side, I'm going to take this, I'm going to change the color. Okay, so we can see what the front light and the back light is. You can see here that we have, some decent information, okay? And yours is going to be a lot slower, okay? Yours is going to be a lot slower. If I hit 0 over here, you can see that I'm in the camera view now. And if I take the camera, I have, let's actually turn off OCCD at the moment. Look at the top, and you can see I'm selected on the camera. Go here to your render properties, click on render region, and then we can take these little handles right here, and you can just take a snippet of your section, okay? And we can zoom in on that area. So you can make it smaller and you can actually just look at one specific area. And if you have a not as advanced computer as I do, you can zoom in on that section and it'll render much, much, much faster. The other thing you can do here to make this faster is if you go over to the render settings and you go down to volumes right here, there's some things here that you may never have looked at. If I take this max steps here and I make this 1, for example, you can see that it renders really, really fast, but it's not really high quality. And that's okay if you're just, you can see that it changed it to 2 here. That's okay if you're just like previewing, okay? So let's, change this to 50. So that gives us a good idea and it renders a lot faster. And you can take this viewport right here where it says step rate render and viewport. Take this and change it to a 3 or a 10, and it will render a lot faster because it's not going to be going so thin through this thing. Basically, the smaller the number, so if I make this a 0.1, for example, it takes a lot longer to render, but it looks more detailed. And if we zoom in, you can actually see more of the detail of these voxel lines here. And if we change it to like a 3, it's not as apparent. So based on your final render, maybe that's what you want to do. When we get to the render stage, we'll talk about that in more detail. But this will at least help you view these things in a lot easier way so that when you're doing your lighting and you're doing your shading or you're just checking out your overall volume, you can actually take a look at it without it taking forever to render that frame. Now, because I have an RTX 3090 and I'm not sponsored by anybody, I can kind of zoom around here at ease because it's a very, very fast GPU. And if I take this, go to the shader editor here, and let's just increase this to like a 3 maybe, and we can see that fire a lot better. Take the density down to a 10 or something, maybe set this temperature back to a 1, and it just kind of looks crappy. And that's okay. We're going to be doing, like I said, some more materials to this, so don't worry too much about that. What we really want to focus on is the quality of our smoke and our fire right now. So if I go back to the 3D viewport, and we go back to solid mode here. I mean, really, we only need one of these open, but it's fine. Let's go over to our settings, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding some noise. Okay, so we're going to click this, and what I'm going to do, just for you guys to see how this kind of works, I'm going to go ahead and bake out just what it shows right here, just so I can talk about some things. So we're going to bake this noise in, and let's see what that does. Okay, so now we are finished with that, and if we take a look at the RAM with OCCT, you can see that it's above 8 gigs now. Okay, so it uses more of our RAM to just sort of like look at this thing, and if we're moving through it, you can see that there is more detail, and if we zoom in, you can see that as we kind of like look around, we can't see the more obvious voxel, you know, issues, but it still doesn't look that great. I mean, it has some noise added to it, but it kind of looks, I don't know. To me, this doesn't look very good. So what do we do? Let's move the OCCT back down and let's just look at some of our settings here. So if you look at noise, you can see that we have the up res factor that we kept at 2. And then the strength here is at a 1. the scale is at a 2, and the time is at a 0.1. So let's free the noise, and you can feel free to experiment with this. And I recommend, as always, to experiment as much as you want. And you'll notice also, by the way, the the smoke simulation is not going to be visible if you have noise selected and there's no noise data. If you deselect this, you can then play back without the noise, okay? But if we turn the noise on, and if you were to play with some of these, you could put the strength down to a 0.1 or something, and, the scale, you can change this and the time. What I have found for this particular type of simulation, and what I think looks really, really awesome, is if we take the scale and we change this to a 10. So it will have larger vortices, meaning that the noise is going to be a lot more subtle. It's not going to be like this really, really sharp, jagged noise pattern. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the time and I'm going to take this up to 10 as well. So we're going to go super extreme in both directions with this. And then for the strength, let's put this at like a 0.1. So just a bit of large scale noise, and the time, as you can see here, the animation time of the noise. So the higher this number, the slower it is. So let's bake that noise and let's see what happens. And again, what's always really awesome is you can just take this and you can kind of just in your brain remember, or you can take some screen grabs of what it looked like before, and we can hit escape and we can take a look. So if we zoom in, you can see that it's got more of the detail, but it doesn't have that weird jaggedy stuff. You do kind of see the shape of your object here. We do see some ripples, and that's basically the geometric shape that we're kind of seeing there, which can look kind of cool. It just depends on how you've created your object. If you used a UV sphere or if you used a rounded box or cube like we did, it'll look a little bit different there. And we have a more detailed flame that doesn't look as crazy as the other one where it had all those like noise ripples and stuff like that. And if we look at it in the rendered view, it's a lot smoother. Okay. Now let's free this. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set this upres factor to a 5. Now that's crazy. 5 is a really big number, and you can notice that after I did that, my computer is now getting really slow. For some reason, if you change this on the frame and it hasn't been baked yet, it does go slow as if it's been baked. I really don't know why that happens. But for my computer, I know that I can actually handle this, and I could probably go higher than this 5. But this is going to make this a much more detailed mesh or volume. And the fire is going to be much more detailed. And what's going to happen is when we start to add really complex shaders, if you don't have a high enough upres factor, or if your fluid original resolution division isn't high enough, you're going to start to see sort of like the issues with the voxel size. Okay. So with this being up to a 5, we're going to have a really highly detailed mesh. And it's going to take more space, it's going to take more RAM and all that kind of stuff, but you save a lot more space on your computer, and you have a much easier time later doing sparks and just, doing materials and doing some other things if you have the ability to turn on and off the noise so you can move through your scene a lot easier. So, setting that to a 5.1 for the strength, scale at a 10, time at a 10, we're going to bake this noise, and we're going to fast forward through this. Okay, so there we go. You can see here that the RAM did go up. It did spike quite a bit. It went above the 20 mark. You can see there as I moved frames, you can see that it increases and decreases. So it stays well below 32, even when switching frames. And if I move this here, you can see here that there's a lot more stuff going on. And I am kind of trying to move my screen, and you can see that it's just slow. Okay, so this is going to happen. And this is just because there's a lot of data in there that it's trying to read. And if we zoom out a bit and we take a look at the rendered view, it tends to sometimes actually be faster if I look at it with the rendered view. And there we go. You can see now there's a whole lot more detail going on. If we zoom in a little bit, look at that. Really awesome. Lots of detail, lots of stuff going on. Really, really fun looking smoke simulation. And as I said before, you can always go down here And you can turn on dissolve so that it's not as crazy. And with the basic shading, and again, we're not going over the shading too much here, you can change this down to like a 1, and it's a lot less crazy, and you can see more of that fire going on there. Okay, so we are going to be doing the materials at a later date. We're going to be tackling the spark simulation though in the next one, but you can see here that we have been able to get a really high resolution image, or at least a high resolution simulation, with a lot of really great data that we can then pull from. So my recommendation to you is to spend, you know, up until the next time that the video is released, or if you're watching these all in succession, just take some time, experiment around with some different effects with the noise, the dissolve function, everything else, and make sure that you're creating something that when you are running it, it is not going to cause a lot of problems. And if we click off the noise here, you can see that we have the regular base simulation here, and it's a lot easier to move around. If we go to solid mode, you can see that we can actually click around to different frames. Then you can turn back on noise, and you can see what the detail has done in that way. And you can see it's very highly detailed and looks really awesome. And when we go into do our other shading, or the actual shading that we're going to be doing, this all starts to look really, really, really cool. Okay. So until next time, make sure that you're, experimenting and all that, and that you are creating a simulation that you really, really like, and that you can move it around from frame to frame rather easily, because when we start to do some other things, it's going to add more, RAM needed and everything like that. And I will see you all next time on DJ Tutorials.